Yeah, well, I mean, for me, the whole Suzuki thing is that it really is all about child development, and music is just the tool that we use to work with each kid. And, I mean, there's all these different components about it as well, but it's really this sort of set of self regulation tools and emotional learning, really. And so, yeah, it's a whole big picture, but music is like the glue that kind of holds it together.
Hi, this is Danae. I'm the founder of Simple Families. Simple Families is an online community for parents who are seeking a simpler, more intentional life. In this show, we focus on minimalism with kids, positive parenting, family wellness, and decreasing the mental load. My perspectives are based in my firsthand experience raising kids, but also rooted in my PhD in child development. So you're going to hear conversations that are based in research, but more importantly, real life. Thanks for joining us. Hi there, thanks for tuning in. Today we have an episode about music. That voice you heard in the intro is Heather Watson Hardie, and she is the founder of the Greenwich Suzuki Academy, which happens to be where my kids take instrument lessons. Heather is a Suzuki teacher. Her school uses the Suzuki method. This is a method that I heard about many years ago when my son started Montessori school. From what Heather tells me, Dr. Montessori and Dr. Suzuki had ideologies that were complementary. I would not consider myself a musical person by any means. I did not grow up musical or in a musical family. But I will say from the very first lesson that my son had with Heather's husband, Nick, something was very apparent. Not only do these people know music, but they also know child development. And it's very rare to find people that are both good at their craft and good with kids. I was pretty sure that maybe this was an outlier teacher, like one really amazing teacher. But then my daughter started, and we had the same experience with her teacher. A beautiful combination of music and child development. Part of the method involves the kids playing individually with a teacher once a week and also as a group once a week. And aside from the instructors being well trained, what sets this apart in my eyes is putting kids together in musical conversation, if you will. It's incredible. So I invited Heather to talk with us today to share a little bit more about her journey. I was especially interested to learn about how music impacted her life from the beginning until present day, what it was like to grow up as a musical kid in a musical family, to make a career out of it, and now being a parent to two kids who are quite musical. And also, many of you submitted music-related questions for Heather to answer. So in the second half of the episode, she's going to do that for us. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoy my chat with Heather. Hi, Heather. How are you?
I am good. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for chatting with me today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm so excited.
Is this your first podcast interview?
It is.
Well, I'm happy to
Absolutely.
have you here. I invited you because I feel like you have so much to share. And I mean, I'll share first how I met you. So I enrolled my kids in your music school. It's been about a year and a half. And my son works with your husband, and my daughter works with another teacher in your school. And I think the thing I was surprised by at the very beginning was how well you all balance musical training and child development, which I think is not an easy thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, the whole Suzuki thing is that it really is all about child development, and music is just the tool that we use to work with each kid. And, I mean, there's all these different components about it as well, but it's really this sort of set of self regulation tools and emotional learning, really. And so, yeah, it's a whole big picture, but music is like the glue that kind of holds it together.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that people are really skeptical about with Suzuki is that kids are often very young when they start. And you were very young when you started
Well, I was
playing the
so,
cello,
so
right?
young. I wasn't that young. So I did not grow up Suzuki at all. And my
Okay.
husband did. So my husband was I think a little before he was 3. And I, my parents didn't really understand Suzuki, and they were sort of anti Suzuki, or at least my mom
Okay.
was. And my parents had a lot of rules, and so I'm one of 4. I'm the third of 4 girls, and we're all within 5.5 years together. So basically, like the same age. But I was the third, and my parents said that everyone had to study piano first, and then you
Well,
could
wait,
choose
were your
your.
parents musicians?
They were. I mean, they met in music school. They went to SMU together, and my dad had a degree in music, and so my mom they got married at 20. It was the 70s, and then they got my mom got pregnant 4 months after getting married. So she played the cello, and my dad was oboe, but he also played piano. And then my dad actually got into the Marine Corps band in DC, and then my mom got pregnant again. And then he decided to become an officer, which is a really, I think, as far as we know, he's still the only musician to do this. And so then he really had a career in the military. So we moved a bunch of times. He sold his instrument for uniforms, and he really cared about music. And my mom finished her degree by correspondence. And then she was really staying at home. He did tours of duty in other countries, but music was super important. And it was, my mom was sort of a stage parent, because I think she had these dreams for herself to be a musician. And she was also raised very Southern. So she was also really believed in this idea that no, she should be a wife and a mother, but she was also very ambitious. The rule was that everyone had to do piano for several years, and then you could choose your real instrument. So I hated piano.
So
And I
how
don't
old were
know,
you when you started piano?
6 or 7, something like
Okay.
that. And I still remember this sweet little piano teacher, and I was very obedient, because again, I had kind of, that was the childhood I had. But
You were Southern.
I was Southern, yeah. And I had, my dad ended up
Right,
being a, Marine colonel and stuff,
right.
but I would go to these piano lessons, and I would just sit there, and I would say, I'm sorry, but I don't want to play piano. I want to play cello. And I would not do a thing. And every lesson, she would still give me a lemon drop. Like, I remember she would give me candy.
At the end?
Yeah, I would play nothing.
Oh, you really wouldn't play anything. You
No,
said
I
you wouldn't,
really,
and you really wouldn't do it.
yeah, I don't,
So what did your parents think? Because 'Cause I'm all in my head like, I would be losing it if my kid was just sitting there not playing. Did they know you were not
yeah.
playing?
Well, they weren't in the lesson, so they didn't
Okay.
necessarily know much. And my dad, for some reason, was adamant, because I was begging to play cello, because, and I heard it all the time. Right, my mom
Yeah.
played cello, and he said to me, "You only want to play cello because your mom plays cello." And I remember being like, "Well, now I'm a grown up, and I'm like, but is that a bad thing?" Like,
Right.
I mean, it's kind of natural, right? She looks
Yeah,
like she's
yeah.
having fun. So eventually the piano teacher went to my parents and said, I don't think this is working out. I think she really wants to play cello.
Yeah.
And then they let me. And so then I started at 8. So which is a fine age, but in Suzuki world, it's not necessarily super young. And
Right.
Nick's childhood on cello was a little different, because his parents, his mom had grown up as the movement was really developing in this country, and she was with some of the Suzuki pioneers at the time. And she also had musician parents, and her parents were also music professors. And Nick's dad's a cellist, and Nick's mom is a violist violinist. And she kind of plunked him on cello before 3, and off you go.
Wow. Well, so I guess thinking, I guess I'm interrupting your story, but just to clarify
No.
for anyone listening that thinks that is crazy to start a kid on an instrument at 3, I think prior to knowing anything about Suzuki or meeting you all, I would have thought that anyone that has a 2-year-old playing an instrument is trying to raise a prodigy, like
Yes.
one of these like YouTube sensations. So can you, for anyone thinking that,
Yeah.
is that
That's really not at all the Suzuki philosophy. Now, the problem is, because the Suzuki method is so successful as a music method, you definitely will get parents that do it for those reasons. And or you'll get parents that do it because they want their kid to get into an Ivy League, and we're also going to, tutor this and take a million things, and
Right.
none of that is actually really what the purpose is. I mean, there are everything with Suzuki has sort of a musical or a cognitive goal, but it also has this social emotional goal. And they sort of work hand in hand. And one of the reasons you start really young is music is learned similarly to a language in our brain. And so when you start young, it's the same thing as being exposed to a language when you're young. It's easier for their brain. And the more you listen, the more that your brain makes a map of it, the easier it is. But the big overall goal was that the Suzuki method is a worldwide peace movement. And when you take really little kids, the idea is that you mix them with all different kinds of kids that look different, that think different, that learn different, that have different beliefs, and you're exposing them to each other. And when you make music with other people, you are developing empathy. And it's the same sort of feeling that every, parent has felt with a little baby when you're naturally tapping them, to get them in beat. And what you're doing is you're getting your brain in sync, right? And that develops bonding and empathy and care. And there's a lot of research on that, and a lot of it comes from the McMaster's Institute with Dr. Laurel Trainer. And so when we take the really little ones, it's because it's about exposure, and it's about exposure to the music for the learning, but it's about exposure to others too. And the more you do it, the easier it is.
Yeah. Okay, so I got sidetracked. Back to the story. You're 8 years old, and,
Oh, yeah.
where are your siblings at this point? Are they still playing the piano, or did they diverge also?
Well, they all did. So my oldest sister had some learning issues, but in the 70s, it was less, it was more like, oh, it's your fault, right? So she sort of struggled in different various forms. And my next sister is a high achiever, but she started on piano and then kind of ended up on flute. And then, yeah, I went to cello, and I really did. I'm the one that did the least amount of piano for sure. And then my youngest sister, who's 15 months younger than me, was probably the best practicer.
Mm,
But also, she's the baby in a large family, so she had a lot to prove, right?
yeah.
And so she did piano, and then violin, and then flute, and then she is also a musician. And she's an amazing flute player, an amazing teacher, and also a mom of three.
Oh. So, were any of you more naturally talented at music, and is that even a thing?
It's not really a thing. Now, there are physical things that you can be born with that make certain instruments easier. So, for instance, the cello is not a small instrument. And if you are a teeny tiny human, there are things you're going to have to do to get around it. Now, my best friend in the world is a teeny tiny human, and she's also an amazing cellist. So it's not like if you're tiny, you can't do something. It just means that you have to figure out different ways of doing things. And my husband, who is enormous, obviously, you've met him, very tall human, he has to play the cello a little differently because he's so big that his arms and legs have to sort of adjust. But this idea that talent. Like there was that movie, I think it was August Rush or something. I don't know, the movie about how this kid is born and just can play and
Yeah.
isn't it amazing? That is total not reality. Now, the reason a lot of musicians' kids go into music is because they've been exposed. They've been around someone who is like, oh, listen to this, it's amazing, right? And it's the same reason why you have lawyers that have lawyer kids, and you have, it's because they've just been exposed. Um,
And it's prioritized, right? Like, in your
yeah,
family, it's very much prioritized.
yeah, absolutely. I remember when I first got into Suzuki teaching, I was of course a zealot because it was like everything I'd never had as a kid. And I remember one of my older sisters was like, "Wait, you force kids to do this?" And I was like, "No, it's not forcing. It's getting them so excited that they can't help but want to do it. It's totally different. And it's harder. It's intrinsic motivation is way harder than forcing,
Mhm.
right? But it's way more interesting because then it's about getting to know your kid and well, what does motivate them right now? And it'll change too. You figure at it and then they grow a little and then, you have to come up with another game. But yeah,
Yeah.
no, my childhood was very intense with music. Whereas Nick's, who had two musician parents who were making their living as musicians, was very different, very well rounded. There was never like, you should be a musician, maybe even the opposite. Maybe you should not be a musician.
Right.
And my family was, my mom really wanted me to be like, a famous cellist. But if I couldn't be a famous cellist, maybe I could play in a symphony. But all I would do would be performing. And the funny thing is that I was one of those weirdos that kind of said, this is what I want to do. And my whole life I had said I want to be a cello teacher. It's just kind of weird because I don't think that very many people actually end up becoming what they say they want to become when they're 8. But
Yeah. Wait, so as soon as you started playing, you knew that you wanted to teach?
I had been saying it like my whole life. Yeah, I was like, I want to be a cello teacher, a cello teacher. And then my mom would say, no, 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 no. You want to be a performer. And
Ah.
she would like, sign me up for competitions before I met age requirements. And I still don't really understand how that happened. But then, I could skip school whenever I wanted to practice all day long.
Wow.
Um,
Did that ever happen? Did you actually practice
yes.
all day long?
Well, I think that in high school I did 9 hours like sometimes.
Wow. That's amazing.
I don't know, it was really good practice, to be
Right.
fair. Like, I think it was, I was like just playing through pieces and exhausting myself. I didn't really understand how to work or how to work effectively, but I did put in time for sure.
Yeah. So you played all through elementary school, middle school, high school, and did you play in your school band, or what did that look like throughout those years?
Yeah, I would play we moved all the time. I went to 12 different schools before I graduated high
Wow.
school. And so my mom was my big consistency for learning for a lot of that, but she would always try to scout out the best teachers in the area, especially after I got to be like 12 or something, because it's hard to learn with a parent. It is.
Yeah.
I,
We'll get to that, right?
even with my kids. Yeah. Oh, totally. So she would try to find teachers, and one of the best teachers, we lived for quite a while outside of DC when I was 5th through 8th grade, and then I had a great teacher who really gave me a foundation, and his name was Lauren Stevenson, and that really helped me for a long time. And then after that, I would play in whatever youth orchestra there was. My mom would sign me up for everything possible. And I do remember I was really into ballet for a little while. I really liked it a lot. I really liked to dance. And then I remember in the 5th grade, in the room I shared with my sister, we were playing Barbies, and my mom comes in, and I think I had dance that day. And she goes, just so you know, you have just quit ballet. And I was like, huh? And she goes, first of all, you're not going to be a famous ballerina. And even if you are, your career will be over by the time you're 20. And it's taking away too much time for cello, so you just quit.
Wow.
And then I'll just contrast that with my husband's childhood, who, by the way, both of his parents have doctorates. They all did their best. It's just really different, but my mother-in-law, both of her parents were professors as well. So very educated. They got married much older. Nick always did sports, and his sister always did other activities. It was all about being well-rounded. It was
Mhm.
all about, we do music because it's good for your brain. It's good for your soul. It's good for, this is important to us. But they always said, when you're 18, if you want to never play an instrument again, that's on you. We will force you to brush your teeth until you're 18. And then if you want rotten teeth, that is your
Right.
call.
Yeah.
And mine was different. I mean, mine was just
Oh.
definitely more intense.
So did you become a famous cellist?
No.
What does that even mean? I like, other than Yo-Yo Ma, like, I really don't know, like, very many, like, I guess professional, like, paid in an orchestra or What? I don't know. Like,
Well,
what does that mean
I've
to you?
played in different orchestras, but
Okay.
not like full-time orchestras, but I've played in different orchestras. I my undergrad degree is in cello performance. My master's is in cello performance and Suzuki pedagogy. Like, I think in her dream is that one of her children would be someone who just makes their money performing. And my younger sister, who's a musician, also got quite a lot of pressure on that front too, maybe even more so than me, because she was winning a lot of competitions
Mm.
young, and she was recruited for colleges even when she was in middle school, which really upset me because I was in high school. And
Yeah.
but I do, it's funny because as much as I love to play the cello, and I do think that listening to people perform music is important, and it's transformative, and it's eye-opening, it always felt more I don't know if this is a terrible word, but it felt more selfish to me. And I love to make music. I love to do that. And I think it's not I think transporting audiences is important. But the teaching component, which is about relationships and to watch the kids grow up and to see the parents and their relationships develop. I mean, to me, it's so much more. It's deeper and longer lasting. But I mean, there's performances that change people's life. Like, you can read a book and it can change your life, and you can see a piece of art and it can make you think of things that you'd never thought of. And so I'm not trying to downplay performing. It's just that I had so much pressure that auditions were nightmares for me. And I was never good enough either, too, just to be fair.
So after doing your bachelor's in cello education, did you start teaching
Or
right?
cello
Oh,
performance,
cello
technically, but it doesn't
performance.
really matter.
Got it.
Yeah.
And then your master's was cello performance with education.
Suzuki
Sorry, say that again.
pedagogy.
With Suzuki pedagogy. Okay. So when did you
Yeah.
find Suzuki, and tell us how that changed your perspective on education, music education?
Yeah. Well, so I went to Baylor for undergrad, which is where Nick's dad was the cello professor for the
Okay.
longest time and the head of the string department. And I went there because I got a full ride, and my parents had just gone through a messy divorce and were in Texas. And I didn't want to be too far. And my parents had all along said, if you can get yourselves to college, great. We have nothing for you. And they didn't.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, I'll take that money and go. And the first day of the auditions, you usually, like, especially in Texas, which is a really like music intensive environment, there's all these competitions, and you kind of meet all these people that you're competing with. And the first day for freshman year, Nick was there. These group of cellists getting ready to audition for chairs in the orchestra, and I knew everybody. I'd competed with a lot of these people. They knew me, and at this time, I didn't have a growth mindset. I didn't have, I needed many more years of therapy to become a better person. So immediately, I was like, "Oh, I have to beat you. I hate you." Right? So, and I didn't know this guy who was, kind of handsome, kind of tall, but I was like, who are you? How do I not know you? And then I made some comment about my mom being a cellist, and he was like, well, my dad's a cellist, like, very casually. And my mom was a public school orchestra teacher at the time. She'd been stay at home until kids got big enough, and then she was a public school teacher, and which is awesome, but it's different than my dad's the head of the string department at a university,
Yeah.
right? That's like a different level of cellist. And then he said very casually, well, he's like on faculty here. And I was like, wait, huh? And then it took another beat, and then everyone else knew that he was Dr. Gary Hardie's son. And I was like, wait, Dr. Hardie is your dad? And he was like, yeah, And I was like, oh. So, and then it turns out he wasn't even a music major, because again, his parents were like, whatever you want,
Yeah.
it's your life,
Yeah.
be your human. He was an engineering major. And so then I was like, well, he's probably a terrible cellist. I'm better than him, I'm sure, right? Because I have to be.
Right.
And so then he would take my music major classes for fun, which was very annoying to
Not
me.
even for credit.
Well, they were like extra credit,
Okay.
like your elective hours and
Right.
stuff. And there's this, when you're a music major, there's this class that's like oral skills or oral training, but it's all about hearing things. And so they'll play something on the piano, and you have to write it down. and they give you like 3 plays and you have to write it down. And as a non-Suzuki, one of the big Suzuki ways that we do it is that you train the ear. And but if you're learning just immediately while you're reading and playing, you don't train your ear the same way at all. So I was like in a panic, and I had like, I still have a little bit of an achievement addiction where I'm like, if I don't have an A, am I okay? I'm not okay.
Yeah.
How do I get extra credit? Please love me. Right. So it was so hard for me, and they would play it, and Nick would write it down after one listening and then sit back like he was bored. And I would look at that guy and I'd be like, I hate you. Like, I hate you with every fiber of my being. And why are you in this class?
Right.
And then, I don't know, it went from hate to dating.
Quickly or over the course of years?
Over
Okay.
a little time. Yeah, we started off as friends, and then people started to ask me to like hook him up with them, and I was like, oh, he's not interested. Only years later when we were married, I was like, oh yeah, just like, oh, I talked to him. He doesn't want to, he's not interested. Sorry. And then he invited me to one of his mom ran this huge Suzuki program in Texas. And all my life I had heard Suzuki kids are robots. They don't learn to read. They're, it's terrible. It's a terrible, terrible thing. So of course, because it was my mom saying it, I was like, oh, well, Suzuki kids are robots. Well, then I heard Nick play and he's like super musical. And I was like, oh, well, Suzuki kids can't read. And then of course, Nick could sight read everything like amazingly. And I was like, what? Where's what? So I went to a huge concert. It was a December concert, and I saw all of these kids like joyfully playing. And I was just like, what is this? So then I read, Nurtured by Love, and I started to get into Suzuki philosophy. And, it's like that person that finds religion later and you become a total zealot. And it was everything I'd ever craved for as a kid. So I was like a baby in training classes.
Yeah. So then did you start your Suzuki school right after?
No. So I did my mother-in-law hired me to teach for her program during undergrad, which was great because I didn't have other ways of making money. And then I took a little time off between undergrad and grad school, and then just taught a bunch, and taught other places in Texas too. And then I decided I wanted to go to grad school, and I kind of wanted to go to New York. And so I took some auditions, and then I wound up in New York. And again, just was on my own. So I did have scholarship, but I was also looking for teaching at the time. And I remember, there's this funny feeling of things in New York where if you get hired by a good school, the idea is that, well, you are so lucky to be teaching here that we don't have to pay you a living wage. And I was being paid the exact same hourly rate that I had been in Texas, but the cost of living was at least double. Yeah, and it was so shocking to me. But the tuition that the families were paying was huge, And of course, now that I own and run a school, there's a lot of expenses and all of that. But it still was not, there's extra money going somewhere, right? And the other thing too is that I had this like amazing community that my mother-in-law had developed that was so supportive and so non-competitive. And New York is different. There's so many people. There's less of this sort of caretaking of individuals. And I miss that. So at the time, Nick and I were still dating. We had dated for forever. Well, 9 years, and then we got married. But we were long distance because he was really going the performance route. He did, after 3 years of engineering, he switched to music. He was going back to school to get his doctorate, and the idea was that of course he would be like a third generation professor, and I would just kind of scoot along. So in the meantime, I'd finished my degree, and someone that I was doing the training course, it's the Suzuki pedagogy was at a place called School for Strings, which is a big training ground for teachers. And someone in that course said, would you like to teach in the public schools in Greenwich? And I said, no, I never want to be a public school teacher. I know all about that. I had been my mom's like recruiting tool all my life. I was very familiar, and I was like, that's not my jam. But then she was like, it'll pay you $10,000 for one day of work. And I was like, that is my jam. I will do that. And so I started in the last year of my master's, I started coming one day a week. And then as soon as I finished, they hired me kind of like for full time in the public schools. And at the time, I was noticing that there was no music school there. And I was just really curious if a school that was sort of like my mother-in-law's program, which had built off this other program, the Prusel School, which is a really kind of famous musical family. I was like, I wonder if it could be done differently, if it would work or not. And if a school was built around the teachers, like you pay the teachers as much as you possibly can, you try to find the best teachers that you can, you cultivate, you make them really happy, cultivate them as much as possible, would that even work? Before I started the school, I had people telling me like it would never work in Greenwich. You're never going to get parents to do all of that, like to come to a lesson and to learn with their kids and to be, it's a really humble, vulnerable thing to be a Suzuki parent, because a lot
Mm-hmm.
of it is just like, well, my idea just failed. We need to come up with a different idea. And they're like, this is not the kind of culture of parents. But at the time I was like, well, it doesn't matter. This is a learning experiment. I'm going to, give it up anyway, because Nick's going to get his professorship and we're just going to move. And, it's not
Yeah.
going to, doesn't matter. So I started the school on all of these ideals, like, let's just see what happens. And shockingly, it kind of worked. So then Nick finished his doctorate, and then we were just looking at, like what was coming in and how much you make as a young professor, which is very little. And so then we decided to just run it together. And that's what we've been doing. And he does a lot of performing still too. So he's
Yeah.
principal cellist at the Ridgefield Symphony. He's principal cellist at Bridgeport. And I have not done performing since I had kids. So that's 12 years ago.
Yeah. We're going to pause for a 2-minute word from today's sponsors. The first sponsor is Earth Breeze. Your detergent, those awkward, heavy jugs filled with messy goo, they're really about 90% water. And most of them don't get recycled. That's right. There's an estimated 700 million detergent jugs in our landfill every year. But of course, we can't just stop doing laundry, but we do have a choice when it comes to choosing our detergent. Earth Breeze is unlike anything I've ever tried. It actually looks like dryer sheets, but it's not. They dissolve 100% in any wash cycle, hot or cold. I have loved it. I was previously using these little pods, and the pods never melted properly, so I had to use my fingernails to open them up and spread it out over the washing machine. And even though it wasn't liquid, it was still a hassle. So not only does Earth Breeze allow you to do good, but it also makes laundry easier. Now it's time to try Earth Breeze, because right now my listeners can subscribe and save 40%. Go to earthbreeze.com/simple to get started. That's earthbreeze.com/simple for 40% off. earthbreeze.com/simple. Our second sponsor for today is Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. You don't have to spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills. You can do it all with Indeed. Indeed's US data shows that over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor the job. Something I love about Indeed is it's simple. Everything's in one place. They have features like Instant Match, which means as soon as you sponsor a post, you get a short list of quality candidates. Visit Indeed.com/families to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/families. Indeed.com/families. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing is not available for everyone. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Thanks so much for supporting our sponsors. Back to my chat with Heather. So let's talk about having kids. And
Yes.
did you have a lot of idealizations as far as your kids starting to play and what that would
Oh,
be like?
100%.
Okay.
Well, for me, because Suzuki was like my therapy for my childhood. So when
Uh,
my oldest son was born, I was like, well, this will be like how I heal all of that in me. And my mom had passed away already, and I was like, well, I will do everything that I always wanted. And it took me it was like 9 months of failing with my oldest. Before I had to be really humble. Yeah, I still remember the day actually. So in the Suzuki world, you have often what's called a practice parent, and that's the parent that goes to the lessons and learns and practices regularly with the kiddo. I had always remembered that my mother-in-law and father-in-law, they had split up their kids. So my father-in-law had worked with Alyssa, and my mother-in-law had worked with Nick. And my mother-in-law had said, I could really see the way they grew up is that they problem solve and think in the ways that we do. That she had said it was so bonding and it's this, amazing journey. And I was like, well, I want that. Like I was kind of selfish. And at the time I had one and I was really struggling with infertility and frequent losses. And so I didn't know if we were just going to be able to have one or if we were going to have more than one. And so I was like, well, if we're going to have one, he should play cello and, I should be the practice parent. And Nick was like, I don't think he should play cello. He was like, I feel like that's too much pressure.
How old
And,
was he at the time when you had this conversation?
two, but
Okay.
close to three.
Okay.
Two, close to three. So both my kids were born in October. And this would have been the summer before. And I was kind of a nut because I was really dealing with my own, stuff,
Yeah.
fertility stuff. And so then he was like, fine, we can play cello. So that whole year I had all these dreams about the ways that I wished someone had taught with me, that it would be fun and we would play games and so yeah, then I went back to the day that I realized that it was all about me. And the whole point was that it was supposed to be all about him, not about me. And that was just like my mom doing it to me, right? Like it was all about her. And I was just, anyway. So I heard Nick practice with him. And I was kind of removed just where I could kind of hear, but they couldn't see me. And the practice was so good. And I actually had to go upstairs and cry because I felt like such a failure. And I knew that Nick needed to practice with him for it to be successful. And it was really hard for me. And so, but it was the right call. And I think that's one of the whole like Suzuki or parenting things is that sometimes the right call for our kid is not the one that we want.
Yeah.
It's not the easy one, but it's still the better one. And so then Nick, and then I learned too that what I needed, as much as I love creativity, that my son needed it to be more structured and less evolving, less global and expansive. And then we learned more about his brain in the process. And yeah.
Yeah. I love that. And then, so has it been smooth sailing? Like, do you have to bribe him to practice? Have you ever had to bribe him to practice? What does that look like?
What I would say is that firstborns are always the trickiest. And I would say there are unique trickinesses to have musician kids that are, well, kids of musicians that are studying music. Because, our goal also with our kids is that they can become whatever they want. There is, we do this for the intrinsic goodness it gives, and that's it. But no, firstborns are always the tricky ones because you're laying the path. No, it has definitely not all been easy. I think in educational things, instead of using the word bribe, we would say showing the work. But we do that all the time. Like when they were little, it was like, if you can we work on this much, then we'll do a Lego brick or we'll stack up chocolate chips and then you get to eat them. And, we have to celebrate all the work. So yeah, 100%. But I will say, our second born is much easier because for him, it's like everyone plays cello. So of course he wants to play cello, but he's the one all along that's always been hilarious where he'll be like, well, there are 10 books in the Suzuki curriculum, but he'll say like all along, he's been like, well, I know book 104, mommy. Do you know book 104?
So are you,
I'm like, no.
are you the practice parent for him?
At this point, Nick and I really do a mix.
Okay.
Um, and so we sort of share it and we sort of pass it along, which has its pluses or minuses. And sometimes things are missed or forgotten. And they have a different teacher as well.
Okay. Got it. Oh, so you're neither of you are their primary teachers. I guess that's another important point. Right.
Correct. Yeah, they have another person, which is hilarious because Christopher was my student when he was little, and then grew up, and then switched to Nick, and then went off and has two degrees in music as well, and now is teaching, and he's awesome. But I
And
will
now he
I will
teaches
just
yours?
remember. Yeah, he teaches
Okay.
our kids, and which is so sweet. And then I remember one time having a less working with my youngest, and he played a wrong note, and he struggles with perfectionism and being told that something was wrong, which is normal. And that's the whole part of this, is to work on these hard bits. That's all it is. And he said, nope, this is right. It is an F natural. It's a 2. And I was like, well, it's actually, because at the time he hadn't ever played a 2, doesn't know, hadn't even been taught that note. I was like, well, it's this 3, it's an F sharp, it's going to be 3. And he goes, you're wrong, mommy. Mr. Christopher told me it was this way. And I was like, well, I'm not wrong.
Right.
And I taught him anyway, and it's in the music, which I know how to read.
Right.
And he was like, I'm not wrong. Anyway, so we did work it through, but
Right.
it's kind of funny.
Oh, I love that. So I got several questions from listeners about music
Oh,
that I was
sure.
hoping you could help me with. Put your teacher hat on for a few minutes. So the first one that I have here is how ADHD and music can be combined for school.
Oh, in a school setting, well, I have a lot of thoughts on neurodivergent kids, and I've done a lot of research on that. And that's probably like 3 other
Right.
podcasts.
So you have a lot of neurodivergent kids in your program, right? So just
Yes,
Suzuki is very much friendly to kids who are wired in any way,
different
shape, or
ways.
form. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's really important, and I think it's really interesting. I think if we're talking about in school settings, it can be tricky because I think in school settings, there are goals that they're trying to reach, there's curriculum that they're trying to follow, whereas the Suzuki curriculum is designed for each child and has a lot of flexibility with each child. But what I would love to see more workshops on are pacing and how to vary up our teaching pacing. And so, for instance, I often feel like teachers almost always teach at the pacing style that is super comfortable for them. But if you have a kid that has ADHD and really needs a lot of stimuli, now, of course, there are processing speech that would make that more complicated. But I'll just say a kid that doesn't have processing issues or doesn't work on a slower setting. But a lot of ADHD kids, if you just go faster, you can keep them involved.
Mm,
Just don't stop playing. Go, 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 go. And it takes a lot of work and training to learn how to figure out how to change your internal pacing. But I would love to see more programs do that. I also think the other thing, if we're talking about, how to help ADHD kids in school settings, is to stop talking, even though this is a podcast.
right.
I mean, again, grown-ups, we love to talk and we're so good at processing words. And a lot of times in a school setting, someone will explain,
Hmm.
but really do. Stop talking, play.
Right.
And maybe that was too fast, but I'm also a bit neurodivergent. And I just think it's learning to, I mean, and again, every kid's going to be different, but learning to give them the right amount of stimuli. But then also with music, then you're going to stretch that kid eventually too. So it shouldn't always be super comfortable. The idea is, how are we able to handle the uncomfortableness, because that's where growth is.
Yeah.
Right. So there might be times when we go deeper or work harder or go faster or slower and that kind of a thing. But what I would say is, if you're talking about in a school setting, is to just get them involved as much as possible. I think one of the things too is that sometimes we get so worried that our kids are going to struggle. And so we avoid the struggle, or we don't want to have to deal with the teacher phone call. Like, how do I incorporate this kid who's struggling? And I have certainly been there, and you feel that kind of like almost hot shame coming.
Hmm.
But what I would say is just the opposite. At least 1 in 5 kids has some form of neurodivergence. And my guess is it's way more than that. And the more we get these kids involved and playing, and the more teachers learn tools of how to handle those kids and keep them happy and engaged, then the better off everyone's going to be.
Yeah.
Because it's not like we're going to not participate in the world.
Yeah. It makes me think about a study I read once about ADHD kids and flashcards, math flashcards, that the more they practiced, the worse they actually got at the
Oh, that's
flashcards, isn't it?
interesting.
Because they were bored, right? Because their
Yes.
brains need the novelty to change it up and learn it. Maybe if those flashcards had changed colors, or if one was digital and one was analog, and maybe one was on a dry erase board, maybe if they were taught in different formats, that could have looked differently. But that just same repeated exposure to the flashcards, they actually got worse because they were so bored that they couldn't tune into it.
Yeah, I totally get that. I mean, the other thing too is incorporating movement in some way.
Hmm.
If you're going to do flashcards, can you bounce a ball at the same time and then do like
Yeah.
and, I think with a lot of education, um, it's really important to teach teachers to think outside the box and to be continually teaching. And sometimes we get these set curriculums and we just want to be like, well, this is the curriculum for this week and this is the goal and this is, and that's not really teaching. That's like some made up rules.
Yeah.
Real teaching is seeing the lights turn on and seeing the comprehension and the kids and that excitement, because it feels so good to learn. If you're trying to join a school program and you're worried about a kid that thinks differently, I would reach out to the teacher and maybe include a school counselor or some of the administration at the school and just say, we really want to do this. We think it would be great for them. We have some concerns. Does this teacher feel comfortable? Do they have tools to work with these kinds of kids? Can I share some things that work with my kid? That kind of stuff. And in general, I think teachers, of course, love kids, and that's why they become teachers, and they want tools and they want kids to be successful. Now, sometimes you find teachers that are find your kid tricky, and that has
Yeah.
happened in our
Yeah.
family.
Absolutely. So, does it matter what kind of music kids listen to?
Well, that's a good question. I have a lot of thoughts on that. Um, I would say let's talk about volume. We are having more and more young people going deaf. And that is because once you have damaged your hearing, it will not come back. It's not recoverable. And I think as a society, we really need to be careful about volume with young children and kids in general. If you hear a ringing, or if your kids, if they're really little and they're trying to do things to dampen the sound, turn it way down. Maybe your hearing is a little off. So I would
Mhm.
start with that. Movies are really often way too loud, damaging your hearing. Bring earplugs for kids in different places. But then I would also say that I feel sensitive about certain types of music that have demeaning language to women or other people. Any language that sort of others people, even if it is very popular or the thing that people are listening to, if it glorifies violence. I know that maybe some people think that I am sheltering or overprotective, but I believe that being okay with that means that you're okay with that. I mean, you could have discussions and you can talk about this makes me uncomfortable because I don't like these words, and this is why I don't like those words. So I'll just throw that out there too. That's a different thought. I would also say any music that brings you joy, listen and enjoy that with your kid. Like, it doesn't have to be highbrow. All music has value. And even music with lyrics that I think are questionable, maybe they're great for grown-ups because you can think those through, but maybe it doesn't necessarily need to be with a kid. I think it's great to listen to different kinds of music. And I think that in general, in America, there's less listening to classical music than there is in Europe, which is also why there's more of an audience for classical music in Europe. And I think that there's this sort of an American belief that classical music is boring or for old people. And so much of classical music is actually epic. Like people, it's about more than just one topic, but it's about subversive comments on government, and it's about tragedy and grief and epic. It's they have huge stories behind them, and I think it would be really cool if you know nothing about classical music to try to learn something with your kiddo. You might do research before you go really before you're like, let's Google this and something pops up, because some of it is definitely not for kids.
Right.
But I mean, it's really cool. It's really, and you can still listen to it and there's no words. So you don't necessarily have to explain what this is about. But
Yeah.
I would say those are the only rules I have for music. Like, I don't just listen to classical music. I love fiddle tunes. I love folk music. I mean, I know my sisters make fun of me because I'm not really a popular music person, and I never really have been because I'm so nerdy. But, I like music with passion
I love that.
and deep feelings. Yeah.
So the next question, is there a link between reading music and reading code? And I'll add reading words, just like learning to read.
Mm. I think the studies are mostly mixed. I mean, obviously there was that whole Mozart effect that came out that said, if you do music, your kid's going to be a better at everything, blah, 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 blah. But, it's the same thing like the breastfeeding studies. There's a lot of other stuff happening in those families that correlate to those kinds of things. I do think music study, especially if you do it at a high level, like if you don't let your kid quit just because it gets hard, which is like, being okay, uncomfortable, and learning. I think there is tremendous problem solving skills in music. If you're getting into the advanced stuff and you're talking about different fingerings, there's so many skills in music learning that transfer to other kinds of learning. Coding, I don't necessarily know. I mean, I do think there's a lot of math and music stuff. Um, and reading, I think it's a bit mixed. I don't think music ever hurts intellectual endeavors. And I certainly know there are loads of parents that get into it because of the intellectual gifts that it gives. I guess for me, it's more about the social emotional stuff. Like, what happens when you get to a part that's really difficult, and you really haven't struggled all that much. The idea is to get through the struggle. And what do you do when you have a big problem, and how do you make a big problem small enough to manage? And if is that not small enough, how do you do it? If you can't solve it this way, can you solve a problem a different way? And to me, those skill sets are transferable to anything, relational things or learning things. So I think there's a lot, you can find a million studies on music and this. And I think it's very similar to other things too. Like, we don't really know, I think.
Hmm.
It doesn't hurt. But I think if you go into music, because you want to give your kid that edge. I mean, it's okay. That's an okay. I mean, tons of parents do that, but I hope that in the long run, you really see it for these other gifts that when, let's say you become a really great musician, one of the things that I think is so amazing for it is, say you're playing some of that epic music we talked about. Let's say you're playing a piece that is about grief. What you're really doing is you're practicing going in and out of those feelings, and being able to complete that feeling cycle, being able to express feelings, especially as a mom of boys, it's not like there is that much play with feelings and letting them go. And in the normal world, obviously we have a very feeling family, I think, but I think culturally it's not like they're like, with girls they're playing house, they're culturally taught how to practice feelings. And I think doing that in music is so powerful and so healing and so helpful. And so if all my kids get out of music is this ability to emote, to work through feelings and to deal with what life gives them, that is more than enough for me.
I love that. Okay. Do little kids enjoy music practice even if it's not their idea or if it feels like it gets forced? This is interesting because I
Mm,
feel like, growing up in musical families, it was just assumed that you were going to play. But like in my family, I didn't ask my kids, do you want to play an instrument? I just said, do you want to play this or do you want to play that?
yeah.
So I guess if you do give your kids that choice to say, do you want to do this or do you not want to do this? And they say no, I don't know, how would you approach that?
I think it's really important that the lessons feel fun.
Okay.
Not maybe not always, because again, sometimes we're going to push, but that in general, there is a connection between the student and the teacher, that the kid feels loved, that the kid feels like, I want to go, I'm so excited to go. And then I would say practicing should have, I always think of it as a diet. There should be moments that are joy. There absolutely should be moments of joy. There should be moments where you're laughing, whether it's laughing at a mistake or just goofing off on the instrument, like not even
Mhm.
learning, but just goofing. I think that's important, right?
Yeah.
And then there should be moments of hard work. There should be moments where you are struggling together, and you could be struggling emotionally, like, how do I work with my child? How do I get my child to work? How do I help them work independently? And that is the point of it, at least in the Suzuki world. So if the kid says, I want to quit, or I don't like this, or this doesn't always feel happy or joyful, well, that is the point. It's not supposed to always be joyful, because work is not always joyful, but accomplishing it is, right? Like everything important in life is going to require work. Let's say a marriage, a relationship. There's going to be moments that are just hard. And this musical journey is this idea that we can do hard things. We can get over this hump. And if we allow kids to quit whenever something feels hard or difficult, that will be what they learn. That will be how they grow up. Well, I can't do this. This is hard. And really what we're trying to teach resilience. The idea is that maybe we need to maybe we take a break from the practice if it's getting too intense, or maybe we can have a hug in this moment. And I will do that with, if we have these moments that get very intense, we're tired, we're hungry, either one of us is in a bad mood, we'll take a minute, we'll have a hug, and I will say, I just want to remind you, whoever kiddo this is, that I'm doing this with you because I love you. And, in my mind, the grown up language is practice is an expression of love. Every moment of love is not going to be joyful and easy, because love is not really easy, right? And it's the same thing too. Like if your kid says, I have I don't know, toothbrushing seems to be an issue in our house, but like, it's not like you would say, we don't like toothbrushing. Oh, we'll never do it. It's okay. You don't ever have to do that. You don't like to tie your shoes? No worries. I'll do it for you for
Right.
the rest of your life. One of the, things that you see a lot in parents is that we love our kids, and it's so hard to see them uncomfortable, and it's so hard to see them struggle. So we want to solve it for them, or we want to end the struggle. What I would really encourage parents, and anything that they do, is to look at the struggle. Is it a healthy struggle? Is it a struggle that they can solve? Do we need to step in? Can we just watch and offer tips if they ask? And that's how you empower kids. So the question is, do you force it? No, because I've been forced. I know what forcing feels like. But the idea is to think deeper than that. It's to inspire them to want to do it on their own, because it matters and
Yeah.
because it feels good to do good.
Yeah. We're only practicing 5 minutes a night right now, and honestly, that feels like a win.
Yeah.
Just getting the
Well,
instruments out and, like, just getting started, like that, baby steps.
oh, totally. But my biggest recommend, leave the instruments out.
Oh,
Yeah, don't pack them up, because if you have to unpack an instrument, especially a cello, ugh,
right, right.
it's like
Except that
it's
we have
like
to bring
half
it
the
in the car
practice.
twice a week, so that's, I guess.
Yeah, you have to pack. Yeah, we do the same thing too. We have a,
Right,
not to try to be too enabling, but sometimes I'll do the unpacking and
right.
packing for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to get it going.
Lower
Yeah.
lower the barrier of entry.
Yeah. But if you can leave it out and you don't have animals or younger children that will ruin the instruments, sometimes they'll walk by and goof off.
Yeah. Well, last night for the first time, my son did I don't even know what you would call this, but he was playing Twinkle, which he's very familiar with, and he added, like, his own variation. What do you call that? I don't know, like, a couple, like, other
I love that.
notes.
Well, that would be like improvising,
Right.
or sometimes if you want to use a kid term, you could call it noodling or goofing off, but I love that.
But it sounded great, and he kept doing it repeatedly in a way that was it almost seemed intentional, like he was kind of, like, making up his own variation, which he's never done anything like that before, and it sounded really good. It didn't sound like he was just, like, messing around, like, he actually was intentionally thinking about doing something different that was his and his alone, and I thought that was
I
really
love
cool
that.
just to listen to.
I encourage goofing off on the instrument.
I love that.
Some teachers don't, because they're like, no, again, curriculum, curriculum.
Yeah.
But I think there is a lot to be learned from exploring, and even just like, trying to find weird ways to make sounds on the instrument. Now, sometimes they'll come up with horrible sounds and you're like, ah, but I mean, they're still learning things like, well, if I do this, this is what happens.
Yeah.
And if I do, and I also think, if we approach music learning as a exploration, right? Like, what can we discover? That's why I try not to put limits. Like, we don't have a certain amount of time we practice. We do practice every day, but we don't have like we'll do this many minutes. So there are days when everyone has more to give, and there are days when one or the both of us have very little to give.
Right.
So then maybe that's a one song day. And then the days that you have more, like on a weekend and everyone's had good sleep, I mean, if you just let it roll, sometimes you'll get a shocking amount of stuff out of the kid. And even if it's just mostly goofing off, like if they're just goofing off, they're still playing. They're building muscles, they're building, the ability to find stuff on the instrument. And I will also do sometimes what I call family jams, which my kids enjoy. And we just kind of make stuff up. Like we're just kind of sitting in a circle and doing whatever.
Yeah, I love that.
And yeah, and I'll let my youngest, when I'm playing something with the oldest, the youngest will kind of try to play even like the more advanced stuff that he has no ability. But I'm like, I think that's okay. We'll figure it out later.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you so much,
Yeah.
Heather. I've appreciated chatting with you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It was so great. Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. I hope you've enjoyed my chat with Heather. If you want to get in touch with her and learn more about her music school or the Suzuki method, you can go to simplefamilies.com/episode 339. You'll find all the links there. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm glad you're here.